What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be continuing our rookie recap series. We're going to be talking about rookie quarterbacks. And with that being said, we're going to give you guys some insight on how they finished their rookie years and how we are evaluating them moving forward into the 2024 offseason. So without wasting any more time, let's talk about how these players were being evaluated going into the preseason of last year. So obviously, if we're going to be talking about how we are evaluating these players moving forward, we need to see how their trends have changed over the 2023 season. So we are going to be pulling up their preseason ADPs, and these ADPs were provided by South Harmon Fantasy Football. So go check those guys out over there. They gave me some good Superflex ADP. But you see, in your rookie drafts going into the 2023 season, Anthony Richardson, he was the first quarterback being drafted off the board, coming off the board in the early first. And really, we had a big three or a top three at the quarterback position. The QB2 was Bryce Young, QB3 was CJ Stroud, all of those guys coming off the board in your top four pick. And then in your late first, we had Will Levis, who kind of fell there because of his draft capital. Now, obviously, those were really the last of the big quarterbacks in this class, but there are a couple other guys that we were drafting in our rookie draft. So you had Hendon, who was coming off the board in the second round, Stetson, Bennett, Dorian, Thompson-Robinson, both coming off the board in your fourth rounds. And then in your fifth rounds, if you guys go that far, and those quarterbacks were Clayton, Jaren, and Jake Haener. So now that we've talked about where they started, let's talk about how they played during their rookie years and how they finished. So I'm going to pull up their fantasy finish and their points per game. Keep in mind, CJ Stroud coming off of the board as your QB3. Well, he is the only quarterback in this rookie class that finished in your top 12. He was averaging 18.7 fantasy points per game. Now, quarterback 23, that was Bryce Young, 10.4 fantasy points per game. And then we had Aidan O'Connell and Will Levis as QB 28 and QB 33. Those guys were averaging about 12 fantasy points per game. You see Will Levis just a little bit underneath that number. Now, going back to quarterback 34, the Italian stallion, Tommy DeVito, he was the guy who came off the board there, played some games for the Giants. And then QB 40 was Anthony Richardson. Now, keep in mind, Anthony Richardson was QB2 in this class off of a points per game standpoint, but he did get hurt this year and he missed a lot of games, so he had that QB 40 finish. But Anthony Richardson should be right up there with CJ Stroud as far as those fantasy points per game go. Now, you had Tyson Bagent, who was averaging 11.9 as QB 45, DTR, Clayton, and Jaren, all those guys barely averaging any points, about 3 points per game or less, and that kind of rounded out your top 10 there for the rookie quarterbacks this year. So obviously, we had a lot of changes. We saw guys finish a lot differently than where they were being drafted. A couple names on that list that were top 10 finishers at the quarterback position that weren't even being drafted in the top 10, Tommy DeVito, Aidan O'Connell, and then obviously the big surprise, CJ Stroud. I don't think anybody projected him to be QB1 in this class, but he did turn into that. So with that being said, I want to talk about some player spotlights. I want to focus on the big four quarterbacks of this class. And so we'll talk about each of them independently and talk about how we are going to be evaluating them moving forward. So starting off with my first rookie spotlight, we are going to be talking about CJ Stroud for the Houston Texans. And when we look at CJ Stroud's year as a whole, we look at that 6-month value, we see that he started at a low of this season at 4,983 KTC. Now, keep in mind, Keep Trade Cut is a tool that we are using, a free tool to kind of show player trends throughout the course of the year. It does put a numeric value on each of these players, and it kind of treats them like a stock market, so you can see guys rising and falling in value as the season goes on based on real life community votes. And so that is what we are using to value these players today. But you see, he finished at a high right now, currently at 9,752 KTC, and he is sitting as QB3 in Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. Now, obviously, this price is very high for CJ Stroud, and I think because of that, I would argue that CJ Stroud is a hold right now. He obviously looks the part at the NFL level, but I would also hear the argument if you wanted to say that CJ Stroud at this current price at QB3 is maybe a sell. And I say that because when we look at at the value adjacent overall players, you see CJ Stroud is being valued in this tier of Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Jefferson, Lamar Jackson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase. These are the assets that CJ Stroud is being valued adjacently with. And I think that CJ Stroud probably does belong here. But if you told me you wanted to try and sell CJ Stroud to go get a Josh Allen, to go get a Patrick Mahomes, I don't think I would argue with you. Or maybe you're a team that had a couple good quarterbacks already. You fell into CJ Stroud because he went a little bit later in those rookie drafts, and now you want to sell CJ Stroud for Justin Jefferson. I think I'm on board for that as well. But I do think that CJ Stroud belongs here. So the value is a hold for me, but I could see arguments for you wanting to sell him. Now, when we look at the value adjacent quarterbacks, obviously we've already talked about some of these guys, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes being the ones that are the most similarly valued to CJ Stroud right now. But you see a couple quarterbacks below him, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert. And I think if you wanted to maybe trade CJ Stroud and get down into a Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert tier, and then maybe get a piece thrown in on top, I think you could possibly get a first round pick thrown in on top. And if that is so, maybe it's worth a trade down as well. So I think CJ Stroud is valued appropriately right now just based off of what we've seen, but the value is obviously very high, and it is just a rookie season that we've seen CJ put together. So if you think you want to cash out, you think you want to sell CJ Stroud at this price, I'm not going to argue you on that statement. Now, moving over to the next quarterback in this class that I want to talk about, we're going to be talking about Anthony Richardson, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. And when we look at the year for Anthony Richardson, obviously I talked about Anthony Richardson suffering that shoulder injury earlier in the year, which forced him to miss the remainder of the season. But you see the KTC for Anthony Richardson this year, that 6-month trend started at 6,165 KTC. He was continually rising and rising and rising, and that's because he was performing and playing well for you in your fantasy football teams. Now, he eventually got to that 7,905 KTC, which was his peak. And then the injury happened, and you saw that little plummet of value from Anthony Richardson, but he's kind of climbed right back up. He's now sitting at 7,288 KTC, which is good for the quarterback 8 in these dynasty rankings. Now, I like Anthony Richardson. I think Anthony Richardson at this price is a buy for me in dynasty fantasy football. I think we saw in a short stint there, as he was healthy, that he is going to be very valuable for your fantasy football teams. And a lot of that is because, one, he came in, his arm was more impressive than I think a lot of people thought. And he also put together a lot of value on the ground, which we expected from him after his amazing combine. So like I said, at this price, I think Anthony Richardson is a buy at the quarterback position. But let's look at some of the value adjacent overall players, those being Joe Burrow, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Herbert, Bijan Robinson, a 2024 early first, and Breece Hall. I think I could argue a lot of these assets I would prefer to trade for Anthony Richardson. If you want a high-end quarterback, I'm easily trading Bijan Robinson for Anthony Richardson. I'm easily trading that 2024 early first, assuming it is not the 101. If it's the 101, I prefer Caleb Williams over Anthony Richardson. But outside of that, I will hear your argument. And then I'm obviously trading Breece Hall as well for Anthony Richardson if I wanted to trade Bijan. Bijan is higher for me in my rankings, so I'm easily moving those assets for Anthony Richardson if I have the opportunity. And I think Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert can be viewed in a similar tier as Anthony Richardson. So if you just prefer AR to those two guys, I'm fine making the swap as well. You probably can get a little bit thrown in on top if you're selling Burrow or Herbert for AR. And then when we look at the value adjacent quarterbacks, I mean, we're talking about those guys we've already talked about, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, but then look below him. Obviously the KTC value dips a little bit more, but you have guys like Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy. If you can take one of those guys and trade up into an Anthony Richardson, I'm definitely doing that as well. And I think, like I've already talked about with the other assets, if you want to trade in the same tier for Anthony Richardson because you like his rushing upside, I'm okay with that as well. But all signs right now where he's being valued at, I think that Anthony Richardson is a buy at this cost. I think he can break out in 2024 and show everybody that he can be a top 5, top 7 fantasy football quarterback. And so because of that, again, we're buying Anthony Richardson at this price. Now, moving on to my next quarterback in this class. This is the guy who is coming off the board as QB2. And if you've been tapped into the channel for a long time, I was pretty high on this player coming in, but that is Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers. And Bryce Young had not the best rookie season. We talk about the good rookie seasons that CJ Stroud had We talk about the flashes that Anthony Richardson showed, but Bryce Young did not do any of that here in year one. I think right now, if you look at the KTC, you see this negative trend over the last 6 months, starting at 6,219 KTC, now plummeted all the way down to 4,166 KTC. Again, this is a guy who was drafted number 1 overall. The Carolina Panthers obviously have proven so far to this point not to be a great situation for Bryce Young. There isn't consistency in the coaching staff. The weapons aren't very good. The offensive line hasn't been very good. But I would argue that a lot of this has not been Bryce Young's fault. Now, obviously, Bryce Young hasn't played well. That's given. And where his price is right now at QB 17, I'm going to say that this is a hold, but I would also argue that this could be a potential buying point for Bryce Young. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not actively going out to try and buy Bryce Young on all of my rosters, but I would hear the argument that this price is just too good for a guy that was being drafted number 1 overall in the NFL draft, top 2 in your rookie drafts, and has the talent that we've seen at Alabama, but just didn't have the opportunity to put it together in year one. So again, let's hold Bryce Young at this price. We're definitely not selling, but if you want to buy, these are the players being valued adjacently to him overall. Some of those guys being Stephon Diggs, Tajay Spears, a late 2025 first, a mid 2026 first, Josh Jacobs, and Javonte Williams. And this is where I think that argument for a buy is in consideration. You're telling me I can move a guy like Tajay Spears, who I've been very high on this offseason. I've been high on him in the rookie drafts. It's a guy who could potentially be a starting running back in the NFL going into 2024, but all I have to do is trade Tajay Spears and I can get Bryce Young, especially in super flex leagues where quarterback is the most important position, and this guy was drafted number 1. I think I'm buying at that price. I'm taking a late 2025 first. I'm taking a mid 2026 first. I'm sending those for Bryce Young. I'm probably going to go get my quarterback help. We're talking about guys like Josh Jacobs, Javonte Williams, just again, running backs that are aging or guys coming off of injuries. I like Javonte a little bit more than I like Josh Jacobs, but we take those players and we sell them for a young number 1 overall pick. I just think the price is too good on Bryce Young right now. So yes, hold him, but if you want to buy, this might be a good price. Now, when we look at the value adjacent overall quarterbacks, there's quarterbacks being valued similarly to him, like Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Fields, Jared Goff. I'm taking these guys over Bryce Young right now, probably even maybe taking Deshaun Watson over Bryce Young right now, but the Will Levis, the Baker Mayfields, if I can send those guys and maybe a late second or an early third and move up into Bryce Young, I think there's more upside with a guy like Bryce Young, so that's possibly a move that I'm making as well. But right now, as it sits, obviously a disappointing season from the number 1 pick in the 2023 NFL draft, but Bryce Young's price is teetering on that buy territory, but for now we'll hold him at cost. And now the last and final quarterback that I'm going to be spotlighting in this episode, but stick around because we're going to talk about a lot more of the rookie quarterbacks. We're just going to do it a little bit quicker, but we are going to be talking about Will Levis, quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. And keep in mind, this is a guy who was drafted very early, second round in 2023. When you look at the 6 months trend, it was just a negative trend from the start. He hit an all-time low at 1,957 KTC, and then Ryan Tannehill gets benched. Will Levis becomes the starter. We see a significant spike. He reaches an all-time high of 4,710 KTC, and then he's kind of dipped and swayed ever since. He's currently landing at 3,725 KTC. This is a quarterback who's going to be 25 years old heading into the 2024 season, currently being valued as the QB 19. So right now, what am I doing with Will Levis? To me, this is a player that I am selling at cost, and there's a couple variables in this decision. One, the Tennessee Titans didn't spend first-round draft capital on him, and they just fired head coach Mike Vrabel. I do think that the next head coach could come in and want to make a change for them at the quarterback position. We also have a Titans team who is likely entering a rebuild. Maybe they stick with Levis for one more year just as a bridge guy, but I really don't see a long-term future for Will Levis at the quarterback position of the Tennessee Titans. And so because of that, I'm probably going to be selling him at cost. We look at some of these value adjacent overall overall players, a early 2024 second. Probably not the greatest of assets. Travis Kelce, Christian Kirk, Brian Robinson, Chris Godwin, Jake Ferguson. I think some of these assets you could argue would be better for you long term. Maybe a Christian Kirk is better for you long term. A Chris Godwin is better for you long term than a Will Levis is. If you play in a super flex league, maybe, I don't know if I would bet on it, but maybe you can get a Michael Penix in the early second round of those 2024 drafts. And if you could, would you rather roll the dice with Michael Penix over Will Levis, depending on the situation he gets drafted in? I don't know. Those are kind of situations that I would be looking at. But where I really do see the value in selling Will Levis is at that value adjacent quarterbacks. Again, he is in a tier here with Jared Goff, Bryce Young, Deshaun Watson. Underneath him, Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. I won't lie to you. Every quarterback on this list that I just named, I am taking over Will Levis at this point. If I can move Levis for any of them, I'm doing that, even if I have to add a tiny bit on top, or maybe I'm getting a little bit more if I'm moving Will Levis for a Baker Mayfield. I just feel like I would much rather have those assets this time. They're safer, and I would argue that they have very similar, if not better, fantasy football ceilings than what Will Levis possesses. So right now, at cost, with all things considered, the Vrabel firing, the direction of the Tennessee Titans, and then the current cost of some of these value adjacent quarterbacks, I am going to be selling Will Levis at this price. So like I said, we talked about those 4 players in a player spotlight, but I have a lot more quarterbacks to talk about. So let's pull them up. Let's go through them very quickly, but I have about 10 more. So you see on the screen right now, we do have the additional KTC evaluations of these rookie quarterbacks currently being valued as quarterback 30 on KTC. Aidan O'Connell, I think right now he's a hold. He played well enough in his rookie year with the Raiders. I think that there's a lot of question marks about what they're going to do at the position. I don't fully expect them to go into 2024 with Aidan O'Connell as the starter, but if they do keep Antonio Pierce, there may be a chance that O'Connell can have the chance to compete for that starting job. Now, Hendon Hooker, he was being drafted pretty highly. I do think that Jared Goff has played himself into an extension, but right now, I don't imagine that you're selling Hendon Hooker to anybody other than the Jared Goff manager. So I think right now we're just holding Hendon Hooker. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, he played enough. He didn't look good when he played. He looked good in the preseason, but once the real games came around, he didn't really do much. So I'm going to be selling him. Tommy DeVito, this is another quarterback that played well during the regular season at times. There was a lot of that DeVito hype and that drama that was kind of going around the NFL. Everybody loved it. They were eating it up. I think right now we're going to hold him at cost. We're not going to sell him. But now comes a list of a bunch of quarterbacks that I am selling. Jaren Hall, sell. Tyson Bagent, sell. Malik Cunningham, sell. Clayton Tune, sell. None of these guys, I see a path to any type of starting quarterback role in their current situations anytime soon. Tyson Bagent, obviously playing behind Justin Fields. He had a couple of games where he looked pretty good, but then they're also in the conversation of maybe going to get Caleb Williams. So obviously they're not thinking of moving forward with a guy like Tyson Bagent, or is there a scenario where they would move forward with a guy like Tyson Bagent? The other guys they've played, we've seen them play. They look pretty bad. Malik Cunningham really didn't play too much. I said they all played. Malik Cunningham didn't play too much, but he's a guy who I'm out on him. I don't believe in him anymore. And then you see guys like Stetson Bennett. He obviously had a dismissal from the Rams. They excused him. Some stuff was going on off the field. I don't really know what was going on. They didn't really talk much about what was going on. So because of that, we'll hold Stetson Bennett. He did perform well in college, but I don't really see this guy being anything other than a high-end backup at the NFL level, if that. And then Jake Haener, I'm going to hold Jake Haener, and this feels weird and this feels gross, but Jameis Winston is a free agent this offseason. Derek Carr didn't look good at times, and the Saints don't have very high draft capital this year to go replace the quarterback position. Plus, they also binded themselves in with that Derek Carr contract. So Jake Haener, maybe the opportunity to take snaps next year. It's a long shot, but you're not going to get much for him in the trade room, so you might as well hold Jake Haener, throw him on a taxi squad, and see if he gets any reps this offseason. So with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and it does truly let me know that you guys enjoy the content, so I know which type of content I should be making for you moving forward. Additionally, make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel. I want to make sure that you guys are also hitting that notification bell. That way you guys are notified for any future videos when they do come out. Also, if you feel like you disagree with anything that was said in this video, or maybe you agree with things that were said in this video, let me know know in the comments down below. Love hearing your guys' feedback and interacting with you guys there. And last but not least, make sure you guys are signed up for the free Discord. There is a free Discord link in the description. Like I said, we are in there talking Dynasty Fantasy Football all day, 24/7, 365, trades, waiver advice, strategy, whatever you can think of. We're helping you out with your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters, and it is free, so there is no risk in joining that. Now, with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video, but until then, peace out.